Um, Tonight, I am going to talk a little bit about a question of coding. When you know the question, I feel like there's a lot of ways to find the answer. The truly difficult thing is when you don't know what the question is. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So first off, sorry. Sorry, my slides aren't progressing as planned. One moment.
Well, she's getting that all figured out. Just to give a little background on this event. We call it WTF is coding. Just it's a great way just to kind of dive into what the F coding is. Our founder kind of came up with it, and we were looking for a way to really kind of break down the barrier, because it's for those who are just getting started, like that line of where do I go from zero to actually writing that first line of code. It's kind of hard and it's kind of scary. So that's kind of why we created this event. And Sarah's going to kick it off.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm going to do kind of lame non-presenter mode for just a moment. I don't know why I wasn't getting the progression action to happen. But anyway, welcome to our virtual classroom. This is where I hang out all day. I feel like our life has become sort of this collection of boxes on screens. That and sweatpants. I have worn jeans 3 times in the past year. I think I may leave jeans behind forever. I'm taking my comfortable pants really seriously now. I have work pants that are comfortable, but then I have sweatpants that are lounging, and they're different. They live in different drawers. It's important. But anyway. Just to kind of give you an overview as we move through this together, we are really familiar with Zoom now because this is where we spend our day. Clearly you made it here, and we've been in a virtual world for the last year, almost year and a half, and so I'm going to make the assumption that you're at least familiar with Zoom. But just to be inclusive, because some people are not and use different technologies, I just want to briefly go over this. So for the most of the session, I'll be sharing my screen with you, so it'll look like this. You can have a different set of views, and depending on what you want to see on your screen, there's different ways to configure that. There's also the row on the bottom of the screen that gives you options to do things like reactions. And so reactions are little emojis that pop up in the corner of your screen. I personally love these reactions because it allows engagement in a way that is pretty low key. Big fan of that. I also really appreciate and encourage you to turn your camera on. I don't care if your room is messy or if you're eating, it's all good with me. Like I said, I've spent 8 hours a day on Zoom for a year and a half. I'm super comfortable with that. I love the pet bombs. If you have a cute cat, please put it front and center. It just really helps me talking to people versus names on a screen. So all good. There's also the chat feature in Zoom. Again, you can find that on the little bar down at the bottom. Please feel free to use this. Sometimes when I'm screen sharing, I lose the chat a little bit, so I may just be a slight delay in your response. But if anybody, TJ usually is pretty good about keeping up with those. And if anyone wants to ask a question, please do. Please just speak up. I don't consider, I consider these conversations, so interruptions are not a thing. They're just part of the conversation. So really, if there's anything that you want to add or ask a question or ask for, anything clarifying, please do. I would very much prefer to talk again to people and not just at black screens on the box. Great. So Zoom, check. Because this is a public link, we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to keep our meetup a positive experience for everybody. At Learn, we strive to create inclusive and brave spaces. A brave space is a philosophy that we follow at Learn, which is that everybody is allowed and encouraged to express ideas and learn from each other. Take a look outside of your immediate self. The idea of a brave space is that we can come together with all of our uniquenesses and that we can share individual experiences. And then in turn, we get to create this whole between all of us that's greater than the individual sum of its parts. And that means that if you're going to be in that space, that we are never going to disparage or cause harm to each other intentionally. So on the extremely rare off chance that any of the participants in our meetup or in our classroom here at Learn are not respectful of our brave space or use insulting or profane language or inappropriate images or in any way causes anyone to feel unsafe, we're gonna remove that person and report the problem if it's necessary. So it's never happened, luckily for us, but I think it's important to just set that out there so that that everyone feels and understands the expectations here. So all right, so with that, hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun. So at our virtual classroom and every morning at Learn, we start our day by answering kind of a fun question, kind of like an icebreaker question, but it's our way of separating our work space from our home space. For most people, those spaces physically are close together, but it's important to step into your workspace. And so we start our mornings by kind of doing what we call a check-in, answer a fun question, and then just kind of say how we're feeling. So I would love to offer these options of questions to you as a group. If you feel comfortable, feel free to just unmute and answer any of the questions that you want and share that with everyone. If the chat is more your style, go for it there. But if you want to answer one or all, fantastic. What is your current or recent job? Share a movie or TV series that you're enjoying right now or that you love. Are you a coffee or tea person? That can create some animosity. Or if you could keep a miniature version of an animal as a pet, what would it be? No harm to the animal.
Aloha, hi. So, unless somebody else was talking and I didn't hear them.
No, go for it, Charlene.
Okay, so I'm Charlene. I'm currently in Honolulu, Hawaii. My husband retired. So my current job is try to make sure everybody doesn't go crazy on this move out. But yeah, so my favorite TV series and movie, oh my goodness. So I'm kind of a binge watcher because I don't get to watch much TV, but once my child is asleep, it's like party's on, and I rewatched Dexter. It's something about taking out bad people. Yeah, so I rewatched that, binge watched that again. Coffee or tea? Even though I was in the Navy and I never gravitated to that coffee thing, I'm a tea person, the pinky in the air, honey and lemons, that's me. And a miniature version of an animal. So I couldn't bring my dog, he's a mastiff. We couldn't bring him over because he's much older. So if I could have had a miniature version of him, because he's so goofy and people would just run across the street because he's so huge, but he's a lover. He would just go on his belly, you get too close to him. So that's me.
I love it. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else would like to go?
I'll hop in real quick. So my name is TJ. I'm the marketing manager here at Learn. You know, I've like I said, the marketing manager, but recent TV movie or series. Quiet Place 2 just came on Paramount Plus, and I'm really excited to get into that. But coffee, cold brew, nitro brew coffee, that's where I'm at. And if I could keep a miniature version, it'd be my weenie dog. And she's already small, so she doesn't need to get any smaller. But yeah, that's me. Anybody else want to go up?
I'll go ahead.
Angel? Oh yeah, Dan? Yeah, go for it.
Sorry.
Angel? Oh, she just wants to know about Luca Baby. That's fine.
He's right
My
here.
name's Dan, and I recently watched, what is the name of it? Oh, Patriot on Amazon Prime. And yes, that's where I worked. I already say that. But I like coffee, and nitro cold brew is probably the best you can get. And I would definitely have a miniature horse.
That's right. Am I? How do I know if I'm unmuted or muted? Am I good?
Oh yeah, you're good.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, Angel, you're unmuted.
All right. I'm Angel. This is my dog, Luca Brasi. So if I could get him smaller again, I would take him for sure. But I used to be a welder and a mechanic. So yeah, I got out of that field recently. Movie or TV? I think I just watched Lupin? Lupin on Netflix. That was really good. I think that's like probably the best show out. But and I'm not a real big coffee or tea drinker.
Monster.
I drink Monsters, but
Angel, can you spell that show you were talking about?
it's Lupin. Lupin.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll check into it.
Yeah, no problem. It's awesome. You'll love it. And then that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else want to go? No pressure, but please feel free. All right. Well, I'll do mine. Hello, that's me. My name's Sarah Proctor, and I'm lead instructor at Learn Academy. And Learn is a web development bootcamp. And it was actually San Diego's first web development bootcamp. Actually, Southern California's first web development bootcamp. And Learn is it's a full-time 4-month program. It is immersive. We go 9 to 5 every day, Monday through Friday for 4 months. And we specialize in people who are wanting to make career transitions. So people in other industries that want to become web developers. And we teach full stack development, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But one of our missions at Learn is to help build the tech community in San Diego, help to diversify and expand the tech industry. And so this particular meetup came into existence as part of that mission. Like we do a lot of community meetups and outreaches. It's good for us in so many ways. It helps us build our community, of course. It also offers our students an opportunity to take place in being the speakers at events, sometimes for the very first time, which is really exciting. And it also offers us the opportunity to just share our knowledge for free with the greater world. The world of development and coding can be incredibly intimidating. And when working at Learn, when TJ and I were like, we want to do a meetup that talks about coding in a way that's really approachable. Like I want to be able to talk about coding in a really plain way, in a way that like my mom will understand. And that's not a diss to my mom. She's incredibly smart, but just, like you tell your mom what you do and she's like, yeah, that's great. But like, I want to break it down to that level. And because I feel like that's one of the biggest problems is like, you see this and it's like, you don't even know how to start. And so we were, as TJ mentioned earlier, we were talking about this in a meeting and we were like, we want to be able to explain coding. And our boss, one of the founders of Learn, Rob Kaufman, was like, oh, so you want to explain what the F coding is? And we were cracked up, but we were like, yes, that's exactly it. And the name stuck. He was like, I was kind of joking. We're like, no, dude, that's it. Like, that's what we're calling this meetup. So that's my goal, is I want to talk about what the F coding is. And I want to make this available to all of you. So if at any point I'm using words that you don't understand, please let me know. I'm trying not to, but like if something slips in, bring it up because it's a great conversation. All right. Coding is really hard. It just is. And when I first learned about coding, I was working at a restaurant. I'd done that forever. I studied social sciences in college. I didn't really have like a particular direction. I'd worked at a couple different restaurants. I really liked them, and I did all of the things you could do at a restaurant. I was working at this fancy French restaurant, and I was the bar manager, and I had done, I'd created the cocktail menus and done ordering and inventory and like curated like pairings and all the stuff that you can do at a restaurant. And it was fine. It's not exactly a huge use of brain capacity, but it was something that I enjoyed doing. But I just at one point kind of looked around and was like, there's nothing new for me here. I've done all the stuff. I've done chalk art on the wall. There's nothing new for me to learn. And I just found that wall and I was like, I have to do something else. And so I started to just make a pros and cons list. Like, what do I want my day to look like? Like, what do I want to do? What do I want to feel every day when I wake up? And like, I want to be excited about my job. Not that your job's perfect every day, but I just want to feel like I'm a part of something. And so I made a pros and cons list, and I took the pros list and was like, how can I make this happen? And I started to look around and figure out my interests. And I always really, really liked detail-oriented like systems. I liked creating efficient systems, doing things that make sense and not like having extra space in there. And so I was like, what if I tried programming? And so long story short, I ended up as a student myself at Learn Academy. And it was the absolute best thing that I have ever done. So now I'm here. Because programming is not easy. I will definitely not sugarcoat that. It's hard. But what I really love about Learn, and the reason that I'm here today, is because Learn was so supportive. It was exactly what I needed. I felt so intimidated coming in. I had zero technical background. I had absolutely nothing on my resume that would make you think like, oh yes, you should definitely become a programmer. Like it was like, no, nothing. But I wanted it, and that was it. And so I went to the boot camp. My peers in my cohort were absolutely amazing. We're still really good friends today, and it's been 3 years. But Learn was really amazing, and the structure and the organization was really amazing. And I was like, okay, I figured it out. This is what I want to do. And so I started, after my boot camp, I kept in contact with Learn and started doing some of these small meetups, kind of like this one, and just started to build and do more coding-based meetups, and then into teaching classes, and then working into the main class as an instructor. And I've grown with the company over the last 3 years, and now I'm here. So all that is a long way of saying you can do it if this is something that you want to do, regardless of your background, because technology needs everybody. Technology needs diversity, and it needs people that didn't necessarily know that they wanted to work in tech when they were 5. It needs input from everybody who uses technology. And today, that's everybody. Everybody uses technology. Even people who don't necessarily have any idea how it works, you still need it. And so expanding that pool of people who create technology is really, really important. Okay, so what exactly are we doing here? So when I first told people that I was going to learn about coding, I got a lot of mixed responses. A lot of people thought I was doing like medical coding, where you like match up like a number to like a, like a process at the hospital or something. And that is definitely not it. Some people were like, oh my God, you're learning like binary and you're gonna write things in ones and zeros. It's like, no, not quite, but closer. It's not any of those things. It's the scope of the term developer is very broad, but basically what it means is that you're creating software. So it's not hardware, it's not the actual computer, but it is programs run by the computer. And that is still obviously an incredibly broad term. But at Learn, what we focus on in the scope of being a developer is specifically being a web developer, meaning that you are creating software that is run on the internet, displayed in a browser. And when you're a developer, regardless of what you're doing as a software developer, You are taking languages of coding languages that were written by other people, and you are using them to create new things. So in the same way that you could take the English language that we all have just learned, different words and syntax and grammar and vocabulary, and you can apply them in your own way to create a poem that is beautiful and specific, and it is a thing that you created using something that was technically created by somebody else. Same idea with creating software. Let's see. So when we talk about being a developer, and a web developer in particular, that can break down even further into like different types of web development, which we're going to talk about a little bit. But generally speaking, when we talk about being a web developer, what that means is that you're creating a specific type of website. So generally speaking, I kind of break this down into two categories. If you're on the web, you're looking at something on the internet, either you're looking at something that is a web page or you're looking at something that's a web application. And so a web page to me is if I go to a restaurant website and I get to read their menu, read their hours, read, when how you can contact them, all of that stuff. It's information that is displayed, that is available for me to read and consume. But it doesn't really do much. It just provides information, which is great. That's super valuable skill. Everybody needs a website. If you're a company and you don't have a website, you're not a company. You're just somebody sitting in a box on the side of the road. But a web application is a website with more complexity. It's a website that you as a user can log into and have that website store information for you. So for example, Zoom. I can create an account on Zoom. I can go in and schedule meetings, and that information is saved on my Zoom account. And if somebody else logs into Zoom, they get to see their information and their meetings. And that process of saving information is what makes a website complicated. It's what we have to do when we talk about full stack development. What that is saving information on a server somewhere. And so that is the sort of main difference when you're looking at different applications and it's like, what would I learn? You would learn the data part of all of this. So it's displayed to you visually, but the deeper level is that there's information happening to being saved. So why? In the early days of my cohort, when I was a student at Learn, we were asked why we wanted to pursue development, and I loved that everybody had a lot of different answers. For me, it was that, what do I want my day to look like? I was unsatisfied with my job, and I just needed something that was going to use my brain. But a lot of other people had really great responses, and so this is kind of an aggregated list of what my cohort came up with, and I just really like it. So I just kind of want to briefly share it with you because I see this same process in all of my students. Like I said, coding is hard. It is really, really challenging. It is not something that like people try and self-study, and you can get and do that pretty well, but it's just hard. And so you really have to be motivated to learn how to code. And the double-edged sword of the complexity of development is that you are never going to know everything about being a software developer. It just isn't possible. I work with people who have been programming for 25 years, and they will be the first to tell you that they don't know it all. And so one side of that is that can be really, really overwhelming when you're like, I don't know anything and I'll never know it all. Like, that's terrible. But the other side is that it's kind of freeing. You're just not going to know it all, and that's okay. And so you find your niche and you find your thing that you're excited about, and you learn what you want to know. And that there's always more to learn. And so once you can kind of get into that mindset, it's really freeing, and it's actually really cool because everyone's on the same page. There's no one person that knows it all. Another part that I really liked was that it is very much a creative problem solving. There's very few times in coding where there's a right answer, because the right answer is what works. There's better answers than others sometimes. There's more elegant answers than other, but there's no just right or wrong answers. And so you have to be creative and you have to figure out, how can I use this language written by someone else in order to get my specific version of this thing that I want to happen? And however you make that happen is the right answer. And I think that's another thing that like I love about coding, and people love about, like, people get excited about that once you accept it. But it's a weird thing to come from a background of traditional education where you are taught, like, if you pass the test, then you're successful. There's a right answer to the test. And me going to my students and saying, I'm sorry, like, I can't give you the right answer because there isn't one. Like, I get a lot of people that are just like, I can't handle that. It's like, it's too much. But it's, once you get past that sort of initial anxiety of what we've been conditioned to expect, it's pretty cool. I also love that coding is a practical and functional trade. And we wrote this list. I mean, like I said, it was 3 years ago. But I think we saw this a lot during the last like 6 months or so, where people don't want to go back to jobs that are just that sort of mindless jobs. They want something that's exciting. The sort of like mass exodus of employees right now is because you don't want to just do the job. You want something that you're passionate about. You want that trade that like transcends the place where you work. And coding does that, which is really cool. You get to create a tangible thing, and you can apply that in so many different fields and for so many different companies. Are you guys hearing my Slack updates? I'm sorry, are you hearing the ping ping? Okay, good. I apologize. It's a conversation I'm not a part of that I just got roped into, but I just don't want it to be disruptive. The ability to create is amazing. I see so many people that are drawn to code from artistic backgrounds, which at first glance you wouldn't think, but there's people who are artistic and artistically like driven. They just like have things in their head that they just need to get out and they need to make real. And coding allows you to do that. It is a place where you can express yourself through creation of your ideas, which I think is great. Like, I love people that come from like fine arts or like digital marketing backgrounds who are just like, I want to make stuff. And that's really exciting. Organizational skills, one of my personal faves, you have to have an organized mind. Your files, your code can be huge, and managing that and having attention to detail is super important. So I personally loved that about coding. Another one that I didn't think about that has become really prevalent recently is the idea that we have a universal language. A lot of coding languages are written with the command words are English words, but they don't necessarily mean anything. They're part of the language. And so no matter where you are in the world, everyone's using these same coding languages in order to create. And you can communicate intent and ideas through your programs, through your code. And I think that's really cool. And particularly like now that we live in a very global space where location has mattered so much less over the last year, we're in a place now where we get to share that language with people all over the world. With that, opportunities. People, as a developer, you could move somewhere and get a job in that location as a developer. There's no places that don't need them. Or you can work remotely, which we've all seen, which is really great. And code itself can be really artistic and beautiful. Like I said, we can create things that are beautiful, but also the code itself can be really pretty. You just sometimes see code snippets that you're like, oh, that's awesome. Like, it's efficiently solving the problem. It looks pretty. It's just great. So that's my cohesive list. And the other great thing that I see in my students that comes about, like, let's say about week 5 in our program, where all of a sudden someone will be like, I have a new appreciation for the video game that I'm playing that has a weird glitch in it, because I realized that programmers made that and they crafted everything on this, and somebody messed up, somebody didn't get this thing right, but I realize now how hard that is. And so I love this moment of like people like recognizing the work that goes into the technology that we use every single day. Like most people have no idea how that works, and we just get to use it. But when you get to peel back the curtain and see what happens in order to create the technology that we just take for granted, I mean, it's pretty cool. And it's fun to be one of the, you feel like one of the few that like, you're like, oh, I see what's happening. Like I get how this all works, which is pretty neat. Cool. Questions, thoughts, comments so far? Great. So programming languages. Programming languages are a lot like any other language, right? Developers use languages written by other people to create new things. So they have vocabulary. There's certain words that mean things to a programming language. We have structure. We have to put things in order to create meaning. And ultimately, all of this is the goal of communication. And communication when you're talking about coding languages comes in two ways. One is that we have to communicate to the computer the actions that we want it to perform. Computers are inflexible machines. They are really good at doing one thing over and over again. Computers are not good at nuance. They're not good at getting the gist of what you mean. So you have to be very specific with your communication from your coding language to the computer. But the second part, and arguably even more important part, is the aspect of communication to you as a developer to someone else as a developer, which could even be future you. No one is a worse programmer than you 6 months ago, but code is something that only works if people are continually updating it. Code evolves, language evolves. And so even if you write something super fantastic and it is unreadable by another human, no one is going to be able to update that. And at some point, the computer is not going to be able to run it and it's going to get thrown out. And so coding has to be this twofold balance of communicating to your computer and communicating to other humans. So when we talk about languages break down into two sort of general categories. There's lots of different programming languages, just the way that there's lots of different human spoken languages. But in the broadest, most oversimplified terms, we can talk about languages as falling into the category of being a front-end language or a back-end language. So the front end, which is also often called the client-side language or client-side development, is basically all the stuff that the user sees and interacts with on a web application. So the front end is made up of what we call both the UI and the UX. So the UI, which stands for user interface, is the visual aspect of the page. Is the page nice to look at? Is it pleasing to the eye? Is it on brand for the business? All these things are incredibly important in attracting users. And so I think of the UI as sort of like the art major of development. The other general part of the front end achieves is use UX, which is user experience. And so UX is the ease and flow with which a user can navigate the application. Is it intuitive? Can your user get to the desired result, right? Can you find the menu and click the button that the application is trying to get you to click? Do you have access to those key features? And so the UX is sort of the sociology major. Can humans navigate your page efficiently? So our other general category of programming languages, we have front end, and then we also have back end, which is sometimes called server side. And this is all the code that's sort of under the hood. This is the code that allows a web application to save information and render that information when it's requested by the user. And so the backend is content storage, and data structures. So I think of it as like the engineering nature of development. And all these things come together in order to create what we call a full stack. So when you have a full stack application, it obviously needs to run on the internet. And this is very oversimplified. People spend their careers studying things that we're just sort of glossing over. But the internet, I mean, essentially the internet is the largest machine on Earth. It's all of these different individual pieces that are interconnected. And so I like to think of it as like that, the colony of quaking aspens that like they discovered were actually all one organism because all of their roots were connected. Even though the trees looked like individual trees, it was actually one thing. And so the internet is just that. It's literally tubes that connect servers all over the world. And a server is just a computer that processes information. And so all the content on every website you've ever visited is stored somewhere on a server. And Amazon actually owns a lot of servers. That's really where they're making their money. Like they're getting you on those Prime charges, but really where their money is coming from is that they own a whole bunch of servers and they have so much of the internet hosted on Amazon servers. They basically they have what are called server farms. They're just, it's a warehouse in the middle of nowhere where land is cheap and probably in like a cooler climate somewhere so they can keep their AC bills low. And it's just stacks of computers. And so when a website is hosted, it means that it can be found on the internet with a URL and that content is stored on a server. And for you as a user, what you are doing when you hit enter on your URL is that you are making a request for that information at that particular server. And so I love this picture. I think it's so fascinating that that these are all the like fiber optic cables that run on the ocean floor to connect all the different, like, I mean, to help speed along the processing of the internet. And I just think that's fascinating. And furthermore, I just love this because this is the little robot that lays them down on the floor, which, I mean, what a job. Good little robot. We appreciate you. So, all right. So the internet in a nutshell is that it has to be fast. When we hit enter on a URL, what we expect is information back incredibly quickly. There's a lot going on. What you're doing is sending out this request across all of these lines. I mean, we have Wi-Fi, but ultimately what you're doing is connecting to a router, which has cords and is connected cords everywhere else. And so you're hitting that, it's running through all these cords to the place where that information lives. That information is on a computer somewhere, probably owned by Amazon, and it's collecting all that data and then sending it back to your computer. And so this could happen over thousands of miles. I mean, I could conceivably make a request to something that was out in the Indian Ocean on a server on an island where they're like, cool, land's cheap, I'm gonna put a server farm out here, and I could get it back in fractions of a second. And in fact, most users will not wait more than 3 seconds for information. If you hit that 3-second mark, it's like 50% of your visitors will leave. And so developers have to write code that is going to do this efficiently. And what we're dealing with is the infrastructure of the internet. And so your code has to work fast. And what's happening during those 3 seconds, just real briefly, is that we're identifying the location, and the location is the URL. That is the address of where that information lives. Then we're also sending an action. We're saying what type of thing that we want to do. Because sometimes when you're sending out that action, what you want back, like what you're expecting is just to see information. You want to be able to read the website of the restaurant and find out when they're open. But sometimes what you want is that you want to post a picture on Instagram. And those are two different things, but both happen on a request response cycle. They both have to go out to the server where that lives and either collect information or add information to it and then come back. And so the action is another part that we as developers are thinking about. What's the goal here of the user? Then we hit that server where it lives and it comes back. And when it comes back, what you get is a status code. So if you've ever been on a website where you see, you do something and then it says, oh, 404, that's a status code. And specifically, it's a status code that said, hey man, something went wrong. Something about this request was not good. And so there's other error codes or status codes that that as developers we think about as well, because there's also status codes that say, hey, everything went well, this worked. And then there's ones like 404, which mean the request was bad. There's ones that are 500 level that means the response is bad, and all of those have really significant meaning. And then what you get along with that response code is your payload. And your payload is what you see on the screen. And so your payload is me making a request to this website, and I get back this information. This code is the payload. And this is just rendered. There we go, sorry, just got a little delay. What we see here, come on. Is HTML code. This code is what's making this page look like it does. And so this is our payload from the request response cycle, is all of this stuff, all of this markup language. Oops. So HTML is one of the foundations of coding. It stands for hypertext markup language, meaning it's literally what is sent across the internet and brought back in order for us to see things in the browser. And it is collections of tags. So what we have here is a tag that is just a generic divider tag. It's just creating space on the page for us. And the computer reads these instructions and it says, okay, I'm going to display information for you based on these instructions. And everything in between these tags is what actually shows up. So looking back at our code here, we see those div tags. Div right there opens, and then inside of it is a bunch more content. And this content, let me find a lot of nested stuff. This content in here where it says technologies is the thing that shows up on the page. But we're just having our computer describe the look and the actions that should be performed for this visual aspect of our code. So we get back from our request response cycle HTML, which is the markup language of everything on the internet. And just a side note, what I did here is not anything fancy. All of you could do this. If you right click, or for me on my Mac, it's control click on a browser page, you bring up this little menu, and at the bottom, there's a tab called inspect, or there's an option called inspect. And that will bring up this like opening column here. And in this column, it shows you the markup language of everything. You can look at any page and you can see how it's being constructed, how it's visually being constructed, which is really cool. If you're excited about development and you're just wanting to learn more about it, just spending a minute and kind of like looking through what's happening on random web pages that you like is really interesting. Some of it's a little visually overwhelming, but this is all Google's result page. Let me get into actual Wikipedia. I think that might be a little cleaner. But it's changing. Seeing I'm making request response cycles and we're bringing back a payload, and part of that payload is this HTML, is this visual aspect of the page, which I don't know, I just think it's really cool. And all these are different points on the page that's creating the visual aspect. And someone coded that, someone created that and maintains it. All right, anyway, moving on. HTML. Great, we talked about that. HTML is absolutely the foundation of the internet. It came about at the same time that the HTTP came about. The reason you type that in front of every single URL, or that exists in front of every single URL, is it's describing the process of that request response cycle that we talked about. HTML is the action we get at the end. Foundational thing. But HTML by itself is very, very ugly. If you were around the internet in the 90s when everything just looked like plain text, that was HTML. We don't see those anymore because CSS came along, and CSS makes things pretty. CSS takes those HTML tags and modifies the look of them. And so the reason we get nice websites now is that we can change those and make them pretty. So again, going back to the UI, the user interface, we are attracted to things that are pretty and that look nice. People spend so much money and time investing in the look of their website because if it looks nice, you're going to use it. We just like things that look nice. So cascading style sheets is really important. I just wanted to show a quick sample here. CSS Zen Garden. This is another really cool website if you're just kind of interested in development and not really sure where to start. It's called CSS Zen Garden. And its whole purpose is just to show off the way that you can take HTML and make it look cool. So let me make that just a teeny bit too small. Let's bring it back just a little bit. So inside of their HTML, their payload that we got back is a couple of just notes for anyone who has found themselves here inspecting the page and looking at what's going on. And they're telling you that this website will take submissions where you as a developer take this exact HTML and apply different styles to it. And you can submit your different stylings and they will share it with their users. And so this is one way to take HTML and style it. This page is the exact same payload, the exact same hypertext markup. But it has a completely different look than that first one that we saw. And it even has this cool like hover effect where things kind of move around as you put your cursor over the top of them. And that's all because somebody designed the styling to look different. So you can see the power of how you can take just generic text and change it. Let's look at another one. Oh, the robot. I like this one too. Again, nothing has changed about the actual tags that we've created that are been given to us or given to this website, but somebody went in and created this entirely different look and feel of this website. Just a cool example.
Before you move on, Sarah, Charlene,
Yeah.
a really good question in the chat. She was
Oh.
wondering if there's any copyrights on programming languages, and what's stopping you, for example, of just copying all that text in the inspector and just pasting it in your own website.
Sure. Technically nothing. You could absolutely do that. What you wouldn't get is any kind of logic associated with it. Languages that perform actions are not displayed to the user in that way. But as far as like taking the actual text, like, yeah, no, absolutely, you could definitely do that. And one of the really cool things about programming is it's still in its sort of infancy. It's still in the sort of Wild West phase where there's a lot of stuff that's just free, because programming's hard and people don't want to spend the time reinventing the wheel. And so a lot of people are really good about just sharing what they know, what they've learned. There's tons of projects that are and code languages that are what's called open source, where you, no matter who you are, could contribute to that programming language or to that problem or to that code. You'd have to go about it a certain way, you'd have to be approved, but yeah, you could absolutely do that. Some of the languages that we use at Learn, Ruby programming language, for example, is entirely open source. So, which two things means that you could take the source code for that language, take it into your own computer, change anything you wanted about it, and use it for your own purposes. But the second thing that means is that if you saw something about the language that you were like, I feel like we could do this better, or this is an issue, or I have an idea that would make this programming language improve, you could submit it to the people who oversee that source code. And if they liked it, they may add it to the language. And people do that all the time. And in fact, a lot of my students who are kind of trying to break into the industry, one of the suggestions that we'll make is like, go see if you can contribute to an open source project. It doesn't have to be a coding language itself, but it could be a project people are working on kind of just as a community. And people will say like, hey, here's some issues if anyone wants to take the time to solve them. And then you can just go contribute. You put that on your resume, you talk about that in interviews. Like the programming community is very open for the most part, which is pretty cool. I mean, I think if you tried to take this exact idea and make money off it using their exact code, they may have a lawsuit against you, but there's nothing to say that you couldn't use it for your own purposes just to study. It's the money thing that'll get you. Yeah, great question. Which was a perfect segue, because the thing that we don't see when we inspect the page here, what we do see is that markup. We see how the page was constructed with all of the tags. But if I click on buttons here, there's other actions that happen. And I don't necessarily see that in the markup code, because that is the third main language of the internet, which is JavaScript. JavaScript is a language that performs logic. It creates interactive experiences with your user. So HTML displays stuff, CSS makes that displayed stuff look nicer. JavaScript creates interactions and creates logic. And when we're talking about any language that deals with logic, the way that we break it down is into individual data types. It's areas of agreed upon syntax for a language. And so in JavaScript, some of the main ones that we deal with are strings, which are collections of characters stored inside of quotation marks, numbers, which are exactly what you think they are, and then Booleans, which are true, false values. And we incorporate these together, to create a code that will make decisions and react to inputs and deliver us outputs. So JavaScript is very much a a language that requires a little bit of abstraction. And by abstraction, I mean that it's sort of getting back into that algebra idea where if you create a variable, if you create x equals 6, you can then later reference x, and what you mean is 6. And so JavaScript uses that same idea in order to create, to store data types, to store complex pieces of code into variables that can be referenced later on. And as you pass data around inside of your application, you're referencing and modifying those variables. So that's where that organizational process comes in, where you have to be really careful about keeping everything, keeping your systems in order, because you're starting to modify and manipulate data. And that's where that power of the backend languages and of the data structures come in order to give your web application functionality and store data versus just displaying things that look nice. I feel this every day. I'm just oscillating between being like, yes, I have this all figured out, everything is great, versus just being like, oh, everything is so hard, I will never learn this at all. And when you become a programmer, you just really accept that that's just your life. That's just sort of how you feel all the time. But it just becomes oddly comfortable. It just becomes something that is part of your day and you kind of forget about it. And so it's funny for me to see my students coming in to, the boot camp, starting off, and they're in this point where when they feel like they don't know what they're doing, they're like, I can never be a developer. And I'm like, yeah, everyone feels that way. It's okay. Like you're gonna feel the other side of that. And then when they do, and you oscillate to that point of like, you made something work that you struggled on and it finally did the thing that you wanted it to do, it's just elation and you're so excited. And just like, it's a little bit of that aggressive mood swing that just happens and you just kind of sit back and enjoy the ride. Okay. So getting into development is also, it's hard to know where to start. It's again, the whole idea of once you know the question, it's a lot easier to find the answer than if you don't know the question. And so I want to take just a second and kind of talk about like what's the path into all of this. Because there's a lot of different ways that you can make this transition into being a web developer, but something you're excited about. Because a lot of people just go the self-taught route. And again, back to that idea of things being online, is there's so many free things online. You could absolutely learn how to code by watching YouTube and doing Code Academy, and the Treehouse series is really good. Like that's a great way to start. And we encourage our students to like start there and see if you like programming, because it's not for everybody. It's hard, right? And sometimes people are just like, I don't identify with this. It doesn't make me happy. I don't feel those elations when I make things work. Maybe it's not for you. But there's really, really cool resources online that people put out all the time, and it's wonderful. So I really encourage you, if you're excited about it, go check out all of those resources. The other sort of extreme side of the coin is that if you're super excited about programming, like you can absolutely learn about this in college. There's associate's degrees that are great, or you can do the 4-year degree in computer science. It gets you a really deep level of theory. You'll do a lot of, like when I said people spend their career studying things that I'm going to gloss over, this is the people that study that. And you get that really good understanding of the ins and outs of how your computer works, why it works a certain way, all that stuff, which is so incredibly valuable to a development team. I'm biased, of course, because I went boot camp route, but I personally think it's great because it's kind of that meet in the middle. When I was wanting to, to change my career, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to go back to college. Like it just didn't sound like it's just too long, and like I just wasn't up for it. But boot camp is not easy, but it also it shortens that turnaround. So it's more cost effective, and it's the idea of creating an immersive experience that we really value at Learn. So if you decided like, yes, I'm super excited about programming, I picked my path that was best for me, what happens on the other side of it? So different career paths. Like we talked about, you can specialize in that look of your app. There are people who just do the UI, who just create designs, who are developers. They're not necessarily like, there are people who are designers, but there are people who develop and their goal is design. And then there's people who their goal is that efficient user flow. And in big companies, you have teams of people working on just these specific parts, because again, they're so important to how your application works. The reverse side of it, people who do data science. Like if you love the idea of like taking like a database and being able to like make it really efficient and extract information, like if Excel sheets make you like super pumped, there's actually, sorry, side note, but they're one of the developers that works at our sister company, that's a development agency, got into development because she was working in a job, she was super bored, and she had to do all of these like calculations in Excel sheet. So she started looking up like, how do I create like functions in like Excel? And so she started writing these like little mini functions that like did the job for her. And they kept getting more like her code essentially inside of Excel became more complicated and more efficient. And all of a sudden she was taking her 8-hour workday and compressing it down to like a couple of button clicks to like just input this information and get the output. And on the one hand, she actually basically made her job obsolete and they let her go, which is a huge bummer. But on the other hand, she realized that like, I don't want to do that job that's boring. I want to be a developer. And so she went to a coding boot camp, not learn a different one, and became a developer. And so I like that story. It's a little sad in the middle, but I think the end is the win. So if those kinds of things excite you, that's definitely a good path. And if you are coming from a background that is not tech, which a lot of us, that's the case, you having whatever your job is before, whatever skill set you had to learn at your job before is so important. I've seen people who have done tech their whole lives. They were like, I knew from the time I was a kid, I wanted to be in tech, went and got the degree, have been working in tech my whole life. That's fantastic. They're really good at that job. They're not always the best communicators because often they weren't forced to be. And so if you're in a job where you are working with people, you're probably a pretty good communicator. And bringing that skill into tech is so important. Teams need that. They need people who can do all of the other stuff. I've also had students that come into tech who like had a background. I had a student who was was a nurse. And he was like, it's fine, I like it. He was working in the ER, which was stressful, but he was like, he's just done with it. And so when we started looking at like career options, he was like, but I know all of this stuff about the medical system and I know what's wrong with it. And so he got a job at a company that supplies that technology for hospitals that like create the patient, tracking systems and all that, because he already knew how the systems work, right? Which is like, that's what you need, and you need to understand that in order to create the technology for it. And it was great. That's like a perfect example of like how you can do transferable skills if you like your industry but not your job. So, or if you want to get out of the industry altogether, good for you. There's plenty of other things, and communication, people skills, being someone who can be a good collaborator, all of those things are so important. I don't know, I'll harp a little bit more on transferable skills because I think that is that's one of the biggest things that my students bring to the table, is that we're all coming in with these different background experiences. We're all coming in with our own life paths, and you get to bring that into technology, which is, again, it's so important because we need that technology. If technology doesn't have a diverse group of people making it, it's going to exclude people, and not intentionally necessarily, but just due to the lack of input. And so it's something that's really, really important. And it's really coming up a lot in tech, AI being sort of accidentally discriminatory. Like they didn't set out to make AI discriminatory, I hope. I assume that no one did, but it happens because it is the people's experience who's making it that is getting influenced by that. And so it has to be a group of people who are representative of our world in order to make the technology that everyone uses effective. All right. The other thing that people get into tech for is because you can make pretty good money. The ceiling is high. The other, like a lot of people, a lot of my students have like, well, I got this degree, I did this job for 5 years, and I realized that like I hit the ceiling. Like there wasn't growth potential anymore. And so they decided to, decide to pivot. And I had a student who had a biology major, and he was working in a lab. And it was just like, I realized that like that's all I'm ever going to do. And he like went back and got his master's degree and was still working in the lab. And he was like, it's cool, like it's a good job, it's it's important, but that's it. Like that's the end of the road. And so he came to learn to learn tech to open up that ceiling. And you can absolutely make great money as a software developer. Again, because everybody needs software developers and it's not easy. And so you need people who are dedicated, who are willing to learn the craft, who are willing to struggle, and then who get rewarded for it. So it's a good incentive. Cool. So we do, that's funky. We do a lot of these workshops. One of them that we do is called Jumpstart. It is not one that is free, but it is not terribly expensive because it is a 3-day, 20-hour workshop. And so we dive into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which are the languages that I said are like the foundations of the internet. And so we just kind of dive in like, how do these work? How do they work together? How do you create how do you create little mini websites? And so our next one coming up is in August. So if you're interested in that, please come hang out with us. I typically teach at least a little bit of Jumpstart, and my coworkers come and help out as well, and it's super fun. If that's not quite where you're at, we've got a couple of other workshops coming up. One is a build your first website, which we just use the principles of HTML and some basic CSS. We actually use a library that has some pre-packaged stylings, and that's free. It's like 4 hours on a Saturday. You can come hang out and actually create some code.
Then we go back to I'm sorry.
Yeah. Quick. Is that the wrong date? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just added the right flyer real quick. So that said, our next one is happening on July 31st. So in 2 Saturdays, whichever that is.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, and then just in general, meetups, if you want to continue to follow us, we do lots of stuff like this. There's a handful of other ones that we do. Most of them are free. Again, Jumpstart's the only one that we charge just because it's a pretty significant time commitment. But if you like any of the stuff that we talked about, here's a couple of things to check out. There's a really, really great series on Netflix called Explained, and they have one on coding. They're about 20 minutes, so very digestible, but it talks about a lot of the topics that we've covered and just kind of does a really good job of like breaking down, again, just like, what is this? It defines that question and gives you a good answer. So I recommend that if you're interested. From that, that's my brief high-level overview of WTF is coding. I'm happy to hang out, answer questions, chat, revisit any of the things we talked about, whatever y'all want. I am down.
And when you gather those questions, yeah, sorry about this, sir.
You're good. Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you.
While you're gathering those questions, I will send up some follow-ups at the end of this. So we have a link for the workshop. We also have a 50% off discount for Jumpstart. So also Jumpstart is included in the tuition of our full-time program. So anybody who actually signs up for a full-time class, you are able to take Jumpstart. It's part of the tuition. Other than that, we'll send you a link for a nice discount. So if anyone has questions, like Sarah said, please, the floor is yours.
If sorry, I just thought of something random that it reminded me on that resource slide that I shared.
And to answer your question real quick, Gina, we
sorry.
are virtual. We're virtual live right now, so we're not in person right now. But our virtual classroom, like what you saw here, it's pretty much what we're seeing. It's live, in person. We're interacting with everybody. It's basically as close as you can get to sit in a room with somebody. But our classes right now are virtual.
Yeah, we went virtual, obviously, when the entire world did last March. And just, I mean, it was the quick turn out of necessity. And we're still at a place that we're not ready to consider going back in person. There's just a little bit too much going on. And when we code, we work pretty closely together. And so we're not quite ready to be in that space. But we have had a lot of conversations of like, what does our future look like? Because we're not really sure. I think a lot of companies are having that conversation right now as well. And the interesting thing about like what's happening in tech, the trend that we're seeing is that people like being remote. Like if you don't have to commute to an office, it kind of helps in the work-life balance of things. Like right now, when I take a 10-minute break for class, like I can go like switch my laundry over really fast. And that's then when I'm off at night, I'm not worried about doing those kinds of things. It's sort of been taken care of throughout the day. And so there's a lot of advantages. And big companies, I mean, Google and Twitter and Facebook that built these huge Silicon Valley campuses aren't going back. Like they're just not, and which is crazy. I mean, they spend so much money on this, but they were like, well, okay, people like working remote. They're just as effective and efficient. That also expands their hiring pool because you don't have to live in a really expensive area in order to work there. And everyone's happier. So we're not, again, like it's kind of up to us to define our future and our students to define what it is that they want in their lives. But if we're probably not going to go back to our entire in-person class again, because there's so much in tech that has moved remote and there's so many good things that have happened because of it. It's allowed us to be more inclusive with our students. I mean, some people have things that prevent them from being in a physical location from 9 to 5 every day. And we kind of like being able to be more inclusive. It's our goal to do so. And so I don't know, there's advantages to being in person, but there's advantages to be remote. And we're just trying to figure out how we can make that pros list as long as possible. This to me that I'm sharing is really, so I talked a little bit about like when you do that request response and sometimes you get back, like you guys have all seen like a 404. Somebody made cat pictures for all the different possible status codes. And I love it. I can never get enough of this. Of this website. Anyway, something fun to look at if you just need some funny cat pictures.
I have a question. I'm sorry. I end up using the Eventbrite, so I don't have the function to raise my hand.
Oh, all right.
And yeah, okay. So do you need like a security clearance for certain jobs to do the programming or?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say yes for some, for sure. But again, the interesting thing about programming is that the job, like learning how to code does not necessarily dictate like what like field you're going to end up in. And so people who work for the government, of course, are going to need security clearances. I imagine if you do anything dealing with money or like people's health data, there's probably going to be some kind of background check that happens. But a bunch of developers that work at startups where there's probably 4 people on the entire team that are just trying to make this business happen, they're definitely not going to spend the time or money doing a background check. So it's, you know, it's totally dependent on the industry that you're serving.
Okay, so for anyone that's beginning, what are some things that you suggest, workshops?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm biased, but come to ours. But then also, like, I would say Codecademy honestly is great. They've got a bunch of different programming languages, but I would start specifically with looking at HTML and CSS. And that's something that you can, that's something that if you get a small handle on it, you can create code on your own computer really easily and quickly if just doing a little bit of research. Do we have? Yeah, I would start with HTML on like a site like this, or if you like Treehouse, I mean, you can look it around at the free ones and see what you like best. But I think Codecademy is great. But just starting with the basics of HTML, adding in CSS, definitely start there. If you like that, then I would move to JavaScript. Because no matter what career you move into, you will have to know those 3 languages. You'll have to learn others, but every developer knows those 3, which is why we kind of consider them those like like the foundations of the website. So I would do HTML, CSS, and then move into JavaScript. But starting here or finding like, you know what else is actually pretty decent? Udemy is it's not free, but they do these sales where they'll do like $10 for their classes and it'll be like 100 hours, or that may be exaggeration, but it's like 60 or 70 hours of code. And they'll always advertise it as being like $200 and then they'll put it on sale for 10. So never buy it when it's full price. That's way too much money. But look for like when they do the sales. Like see this like $149 on sale for 25, like do that. And I've bought a couple of these courses in the past and they're pretty good. So I would start with HTML, CSS, and then moving into JavaScript, but they have really good resources here.
I'm not trying to hog up the airways. It's somebody else. Okay. So I did do a meetup, but so when we're paired with the student, is that gonna be, do we get time during the class or is it gonna be after class when we're doing things?
What do you mean?
I was heard that to do some of the projects you pair it with somebody. So do we get time during the class when the teacher's there to help us? Or I understand you're gonna have to work outside of it, but do we get time during the class to do like that pairing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the way we work at Learn, we do a lot of pair programming, which is it's a philosophy of development where basically, to break it down, is like 2 eyes are better than one. Is that the saying? I don't think it is. 2 heads are better than one. A bunch of one-eyed students. No, but we do a lot of pair programming where we have 2 students working together to solve a problem. And it's really, really effective for getting people kind of up and running and past those initial blockers of like, oh, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do. You just sort of like can help each other, bounce ideas off each other in order to move forward. It also really helps with the communication because talking about coding and using all the right vocabulary words is really hard because you're learning this brand new language. And so with pair programming, we found that that's a really effective way to get people to practice that communication that people don't get if they self-study, and that can be like the deal maker when you go to get a job, is that you know how to use the vocabulary that everyone else is using. And so our typical day would be like, we all come together, we do our little check-in in the morning. I'll present the topics, I'll share my screen just like this. We all sit in the room together and you know, ask questions. And so I'll run through and code like, okay, this is how we're gonna do the thing. And then we'll use a feature in Zoom called breakout rooms, which creates little sub meetings off of this meeting. And so our students go in pairs into each breakout room, and then they'll code through the challenge that we've worked on, or the challenge that we're trying to achieve on this particular topic. And so then they can like pop out to the main room and ask questions, or we can check in with them and just be like, hey, how's everything going? So that they have like, we're very like hands-on. Like coding, you have to learn hands-on. You can read about it, you can watch it, but you learn it by doing. And so we have time during the day to do that. And that's like our typical day. And then after lunch, we'll kind of do the same thing, present a different topic, and then have, you know, an hour or 2 hours to work through the challenges associated with that topic.
Awesome, thanks. So the links that you sent, I see that you're going to send this recording. The links have the actual, I guess, I'm not sure what the proper word, program or software that we do the coding on, or is this something I can do on the actual computer I have? I can do coding on? Do I have to buy a special program?
Nope, you can absolutely. There's many different, they're called text editors, which is basically like if you're going to write a paper, you would maybe have like a Word document or a Google, you know, doc or whatever. If you're going to write code, you need a text editor. So it's the software that supports you, like the visual aspect of you writing the code. And there's lots of different ones that are great. The one that I personally prefer is called Atom, and it is free and you can download it on the interwebs. And that is this little like icon that I have in my doc right here. I probably have, yeah, this was our lecture from earlier today. So it's just a, you know, a blank page eventually, where you're able to type, but depending on how you save your file, it responds with the like visual feedback and the colors in the language that you're writing. So for me, we were writing JavaScript earlier today, but this is like the interface where I write my code. But yeah, you can just go to Atom and download it. VS Code is another one that's popular.
Well, thank you for hanging out with us all tonight. It was a lot of fun. But like Sarah's saying, this is really just the first step in your coding journey. So we showed you some great workshops. That's really where we're going to start to get our hands dirty and actually really dive into some code. So all of our workshops are meant for beginners. So Jumpstart, build your first website. All of these are meant for people who really have never touched code before. But even if you've kind of dabbled in code before, it's a great opportunity to start to build up your skills and see exactly how our program works. So like I said, I'm going to send out some great follow-up materials probably tomorrow. And we hope to see you all soon. So thank you for joining us this evening.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Feel free to reach out on
Thank you.
LinkedIn or whatever works best for you. I'm happy to answer questions.